Hello, today I'm going to read Chapter 6 of Song of the Dolphin Boy. It was late when Finn woke that morning. He lay staring up at the familiar pattern of peeling paint on the ceiling above his head, wondering why he was feeling so different. Then the memory of everything that had happened the day before flooded back into his mind. It can't have been true, he thought. I must have dreamed it all. Me? Swimming? Far out at sea? Making friends with a dolphin? I must be going crazy. He leapt out of bed, dragged on his clothes, and jumped 2 at a time down the narrow stairs into the sitting room below. Where was his father? The chair by the window, where he usually sat for most of the day, was empty, and outside Finn could hear the sound of chopping. He wrenched open the cottage door and ran outside. Mr. McPhee, an axe in hand, was hacking away at a dead tree which had fallen over in last winter's gale and had been left to lie at the end of the jungle that had once been a garden. He looked up when he heard the door open. "So you've woken up at last," he called out. "I thought you'd sleep all day. Get yourself some breakfast and—" "Did it really happen, Dad?" Finn interrupted. "Did I dream it all? Am I really—" "Oh, aye," replied his father. "It happened all right. You're a magical boy. And I'm trying to get my head round it too." "And can I go down there, into the sea, Dad? You said I could, you said—" "I can't stop you, can I?" his father answered. "But get some food inside you first, Finn. You'll be needing all the energy you can get." Half an hour later, Finn had bolted his breakfast and was making his way carefully down the steep path that led from the cliff top to the narrow beach below. He looked around wonderingly. He'd lived right on top of this little cove all his life, but that morning it looked to him as strange and wonderful as a foreign country. The tiny bay was a perfect, private place. The strip of golden sand, hemmed in on both sides by steep rocks, was quite hidden. Only a boat passing close along the shore could see into it, and judging by the overgrown state of the footpath that scored a deep scar up the face of the cliff, few people ever bothered to clamber down to it. But when Finn crossed the beach and was standing at last at the edge of the water, he felt a kick of nerves in his stomach, and his heart started to beat uncomfortably fast. What if I imagined everything after all, he thought. Or even if I didn't, maybe the magic only works once. He looked doubtfully down into the water. The little waves, soft and shining under the bright morning light, rolled and lapped innocently on the sand, seeming to invite him in. Finn took a deep breath, kicked off his shoes, and took a first tentative step into the water. He stopped, waiting for the change, waiting for that powerful, joyous feeling to surge back and welcome him into the sea. Nothing happened. The water felt cold, and his arms and legs sprouted goosebumps. He almost wanted to run out of the water and race back up to the safety of the cottage, but then, turning to look back, he caught sight of a figure standing at the edge of the cliff above, watching him. It was his father. "He'll think I'm making everything up. He'll think I was just telling a story," he told himself. "He'll think I'm a coward." He breathed in deeply, took a few more steps, then flopped forward, letting his feet leave the safety of the sand beneath the water. And there it was, that warmth and certainty again. The water seemed to welcome him, as it had done before. He swam slowly forward, letting his ears tune into the sounds of the ocean and feasting his eyes on the shifting patterns of light that the rising sun was striking through the water. He came up for air at last and rolled onto his back. He could see his father still there, standing at the top of the cliff. Finn raised his hand and waved and watched his father turn away. Then, his confidence soaring, he dived again and shot out to sea, away from the shrill squawks of the nesting seabirds and the beat of the waves breaking against the rocks that fringed the beach. He couldn't wait to get into the quietness of the deep water. where he might pick up the whistles of the dolphins, his brothers and sisters, his friends. He didn't know how long it was before he heard them, but there at last was the beautiful, piercing sound, the best kind of music that Finn had ever heard. But what was that? The whistling sound was confused, and now that he was coming closer, he could tell there wasn't one tune in the dolphin music, but many of them. They sounded frantic too, excited but frightened at the same time. Finn had been swimming fast, but now he slowed, feeling suddenly shy. He hadn't expected to meet a whole group of dolphins. He had only wanted to find his friend. What if the others didn't like him? What if they were angry and unfriendly, like Charlie was on land? They might turn on him. It was too late to go back. A long grey shape was already streaking towards him, whistling in a familiar way. Finn knew who it was at once. It was his friend. And now he was being nudged and encouraged forward towards the group that he could see ahead, a boiling mass of grey bodies cavorting and twisting in the water. A few minutes later he had reached them, and then he was right among them, treading water in the middle of the pod. To his relief, none of them seemed to notice him. They were too busy and excited, though one touched him gently with her nose as if in welcome, before plunging away towards the others. He tried to count them. Were there 5, 6, 7? They were moving about so fast it was impossible to tell. Perhaps they're my family, he thought, with a sudden flash of excitement. They might be my cousins or my aunties and uncles. The thought gave him confidence, and he began to move from one dolphin to the other, touching them to introduce himself. He could feel their welcome and their friendliness. But he could see that they were distracted too. They kept shooting up to the surface of the sea, where bright things were bobbing about on the surface of the water. Something floated just above Finn's head. It was round and a dazzling orange colour. Jellyfish, thought Finn. I hope it doesn't sting. Oh no, it's a balloon. A string was hanging down from the balloon with a soggy scrap of paper tied to its end. It's the balloons from Dougie's party, thought Finn. They've blown right out to sea. A dolphin was nudging him aside, trying to grab the balloon. It bobbed away from her first attempt. The dolphin flipped over onto her back and grasped the balloon in her mouth. She thinks it's a jellyfish too. She's eaten it. For a moment he thought it was funny, and then he saw that the balloon's string was caught in the dolphin's teeth. She was twisting herself round to get rid of it, but only succeeded in tangling it over one of her flippers. She began to whistle in distress. The more she tried to free herself, the tighter the string bit into her. It was cutting her flipper where it joined her body. Finn swam up to her. He seemed to know instinctively how to soothe her, nudging and stroking her. He tried to slip the string off her flipper, but the dolphin wouldn't keep still. She kept straining against him, while the string knotted itself round her tighter and tighter. Working furiously, Finn managed to release her at last, but she swam straight back towards the next balloon, a big yellow one, and began to plunge up through the water to catch it. All around Finn, the other dolphins were snatching at the balloons too, trying to eat them and getting tangled in the strings. How can I stop them? Finn thought desperately. He began to swim about, frantically grabbing the strings of as many balloons as he could see, but the dolphins were splashing around so busily, nudging and shoving as they tried to eat the balloons, that he couldn't get hold of more than a couple. I've got to save them, he told himself, but I can't do it on my own. I need help. He lifted his head high out of the water and looked around. There, in the distance, was land. He could see the harbour, with the boats bobbing about on the swell, the cluster of houses behind it, and the lighthouse higher up. Further along, where the cliffs rose from the town, was the little cove below his home. Dad! I'll go and fetch Dad, he thought. No, he won't know what to do. He hasn't got a boat or anything. He was treading water in an agony of indecision when the answer suddenly came to him. Before he had even thought it through, He took off and began to power through the water towards the harbour and the beach that lay beyond it. He would fetch Jazz's dad. Professor Jameson was a marine biologist. He knew everything about the sea and the animals in it. He would know what to do. In an incredibly short time, he was standing on the beach. He shook the wet hair out of his eyes and ran across the sand in his bare feet as fast as he could, wishing with all his heart that the power he felt in the water worked on land too. But he was just awkward, clumsy Finn again. He scrambled over the sand dunes at the head of the beach and set off up the steep, narrow road that led to the lighthouse. He was nearly there when a movement in the lantern room high above caught his eye. Jazz is up there, he thought. That looks like Amir, and Charlie, and they're all there together. Before the familiar sense of loneliness could sap his confidence, he was at the lighthouse door. He had lifted his hand to ring the doorbell when he saw a note that was stuck to the door with a drawing pin. Back at 11, please leave the delivery by the back door. D. Jameson. No, he shouted out loud, you've got to be at home. You have to help, you must. The thought of the dolphins tangling themselves in string, risking maiming and drowning to eat those horrible balloons, made him throw all caution aside. I'll have to go up there and tell Jazz, he said. Maybe she'll know what to do. And before he could give himself time to dread seeing them all, especially Charlie, who might still be in a murderous rage, he pushed open the door, letting it bang shut behind him, and began to climb the steep, wrought iron stairs to the lantern room, ignoring the clang of the metal treads under his pounding feet. He reached the top at last, thrust the trapdoor up, and burst into the tiny glass room with the force of a cork shooting out of a champagne bottle. Help! You've got to come and help, he said. He stopped, surprised at himself. He'd never spoken like that to the others before. He'd never dared. By the looks on their faces, he could see that he'd astonished them too. He took a deep breath. He couldn't begin to explain to them the strange power that had transformed him in the sea. He only knew that somehow he had to persuade them to help him free the dolphins. They were all staring at him, mouths hanging open. Finn frowned. It almost looked as if they were afraid of him. What was wrong with them all? Did he look different from the old Finn? Did he actually look scary? Would they hate him even more? Jas was the first to recover. Finn, she whispered, is it really you? We thought you might be dead, groaned Charlie. We thought I'd killed you. Are you dead? Asked Dougie. Are you a ghost? The image of the dolphin tied up in string came rushing back to Finn, and a bolt of urgent impatience shot through him. Of course I'm not dead, he said indignantly. Then he hesitated. His mind seemed to be working at top speed, and he'd suddenly realised how to go on. I'm not dead, he went on more calmly, but it's no thanks to you. My head missed one of those wee launches by inches. If it had knocked me out... I did try to find you, Finn, said Amir anxiously. I jumped into the water and looked everywhere. You'd disappeared. We knew you couldn't have drowned because the water was so shallow. We thought you'd gone round to the beach. Are you sure you're not a ghost? Asked Dougie, sounding almost disappointed. Finn ignored him. The point is, he went on, you owe me one, especially you, Charlie. Charlie made a sort of gurgling noise and nodded guiltily. We looked for you everywhere, he said gruffly, all over the rocks. I wanted to say sorry, Finn. I really did. And you, Dougie, Finn turned to glare at the little boy. You didn't invite me to your party. You tore up my invitation. How did you know? Began Dougie, then stopped as a blush spread up his face. So now, Finn swept on, it's payback time. You've got to help me. There's something I really, really need you to do. The 5 children had been staring at him, fascinated, almost unable to recognise this new, confident, powerful boy, the old Finn that they'd shunned all their lives. Jazz cleared her throat. As a matter of fact, she said, it's really nice to... I'm glad you've come here. Actually, I should have invited you up to the lantern room ages ago. We all feel bad about the way we've treated you, and we came up here to think about how we could do something to show we're sorry. Well, we're the lighthouse crew, you see, and we want you to be in it too. Finn stared at her for a moment. What was she talking about? A crew? He couldn't take it in. He latched on to the bit about them being sorry. What she was saying was so surprising that he could hardly believe it. But she had given him his chance, and he took it. I'll tell you exactly how to show you're sorry, he said. There's something you've got to do for me, now. Only it's not really for me, it's for the dolphins. The what? Said Kyla. Dolphins? Said Amir. Why dolphins? Said Dougie. Wouldn't you rather have a ride on my new bike? Are you talking about the pod that's been out in the bay for the past few weeks? Said Charlie. My dad's been telling me about them. Great jumpers they are, leaping about as if... Those dolphins, yes, said Finn. They're fantastic, beautiful. There's one who... He stopped himself. There was no time to explain anything, and he wasn't sure if he even wanted to. That they're in trouble. The dolphins are, I mean. You've got to help get me out there and sort it out. They're going to die if... What sort of trouble, Finn? Said Jas, frowning at him. And how do you know? Never mind how I know, snapped Finn. It's the balloons, the ones from Dougie's party. They've landed out at sea and the dolphins think they are jellyfish. They keep trying to eat them. The strings have got tangled in their flippers and are hurting them. It's horrible. Please, don't just sit there. You've got to come and help. No one said anything. They were looking at him, stunned. Amir cleared his throat. I've read about plastic bags and bottles and stuff in the sea choking animals. But this thing with balloons sounds kind of crazy. I mean, they're not made of plastic, are they? I thought they were made of rubber or something. It's not crazy. It's happening now. Please, you've got to help me. Finn balled his fists and shook them in frustration. How do you know about it anyway? About what the dolphins are doing? Asked Jas. Did someone tell you? You couldn't have gone out into the bay without a boat. You've sort of changed, said Dougie. You don't look the same anymore. You've grown or something, said Charlie. You look taller. How did you hide from us all? Asked Kyla. We looked for you everywhere. There's no time to explain, snapped Finn. I'll tell you everything later, but we've got to get out there now and fetch those stupid balloons back in. They're not stupid balloons. They're from my... Dougie stopped as it occurred to him that it might be tactless to mention his party in front of Finn. I don't see what we can do anyway, said Charlie. The whole thing's daft. I'm not saying you're wrong about the dolphins eating them, mind, but even if we went out to sea, we'd never find a bunch of balloons. That sea's an awful big place. We'd need a boat anyway, said Jas. That shouldn't be a problem. Amir's eyes behind his glasses were gleaming with fascination as he stared at Finn, like he was an interesting form of wildlife. Charlie's got a boat. Charlie's chest swelled. His father had bought a new dinghy for the Janine, and he'd given Charlie his old one. The Peggy Sue was Charlie's pride and joy. Mr. Munro had taught him how to row and sail, and Charlie was allowed to go out in her on calm days, as long as he wore a life jacket and took Amir with him to crew. Where is it? said Finn urgently. He'd forgotten that Charlie had a boat. What? Your boat? She's pulled up on the beach. Oh, you mean... Yes, I do mean, Finn nodded vigorously. I'll help you launch her. Oh, well, I don't know, said Charlie. You don't have a clue about boats. I'm not being mean, but you're hopeless at doing stuff, Finn. You know you are. Anyway, it's like I told you. You'd never find a few balloons out there in the bay. It's just too big. Finn took a step forward. The space in the lantern room was so tiny that Kyla had to pull back her knees. He pointed a finger into Charlie's face. Payback time, remember? You could have killed me. I was terrified. He couldn't believe what he was doing. He'd never before dared stand up to Charlie. Charlie reared backwards away from Finn's finger, looking scared, a flush of shame creeping up his neck. I know, I told you I was sorry. I was out of order. I'm not saying I believe in all that stuff about the balloons or anything, but I don't mind taking you out in the boat if that's what you want. Like you say, I owe you one. You'll love the Peggy Sue, Finn. She's a grand wee... Well, come on then, said Finn, turning towards the stairwell. Let's go. Hold on a minute. Charlie was getting up with maddening slowness. You can't just jump in a boat and go. We have to fetch the oars and the sail and the life jackets and everything. Where are they? Demanded Finn. In the shed on the harbour, by the Janine's berth. His grin suddenly faded. I'm not supposed to take her out on my own, though, without permission from a... He stopped hunting for the word. A responsible adult. Your dad's out lobstering, said Finn. We can't wait for him to come back. He could be ours. I'll come, said Jazz. I love sailing. There you are, Finn. You and I will go out in the boat with Charlie. We'll be the crew. You're not leaving me out, said Amir indignantly. I've sailed with Charlie loads of times, and I can do life-saving. We don't need to worry about the responsible adult bit either, said Jazz. My dad's an adult. He doesn't know a thing about boats and sailing. If I ask him casually, he'll think it's all quite normal. He probably won't even hear me. He'll be too busy writing his paper on limpets. He's not in, said Finn. He left a note on the door. That's why I came up here. Oh, he's in all right, said Jazz. He always does that when he doesn't want people to disturb him. Dougie had been wriggling uncomfortably on his cushion. I wish I could come, Finn, but I can't, he said unhappily. I'd be late for my dinner, and Mum would go crazy. It's so unfair. Kyla stays out all the time, but Mum won't let me. Kyla was shaking her head. You're nuts, all of you, she said. Go out to sea with Charlie in a little boat? What if a storm comes up? What if there's killer whales out there? They come in close to shore sometimes. My dad's seen them. You could all be knocked into the sea, and she realised that no one was taking any notice. Well, I'm not coming anyway. It's far too risky, she finished lamely. That's just as well, Jazz said crisply. We need you to stay here at HQ for backup. Got your mobile with you? Kyla nodded. Good. You wait up here. We'll send you an SOS call if anything goes wrong. You can alert my father or any responsible adult, said Amir. Charlie had pressed his face up against the glass wall and was looking out to sea. What do you mean, if anything goes wrong? I'm a good sailor, so I am. You can trust me. And like I said, it's great weather for a sail, he said. We won't be seeing any dolphins, though. You never do when you're looking for them. I told you, you can leave that bit to me, said Finn, who had been dancing with impatience. Now come on. And Jazz, bring some scissors with you. We'll need them to cut the strings. What strings? Said Jazz. The strings tying up the dolphins. I told you, Finn almost yelled. Oh, yes, of course, the strings, she said soothingly, and Finn could tell she was humouring him. I don't care if they believe me or not, he thought. As long as Charlie gets me out to sea,